Okay, we're recording.
We're recording right now.
We are live.
All right. Hey, welcome to Cody and Jarrod Talk. If you're here listening, we really appreciate it. Jarrod, you were talking about Marbury Madison earlier. I want to get more into that, which is why we pressed record. If you could just start with the background on it, and
So,
I'll chime in when I have a point.
sure. I'm Jarrod. Thank you, Cody. The facts of the case of Marbury versus Madison. Thomas Jefferson defeated John Adams in the 1800 presidential election. Before Jefferson took office on March 4th, 1801, Adams and Congress passed the Judiciary Act of 1801, which created new courts, added judges, and gave the president more control over appointed judges. The act was essentially an attempt by Adams and his party to frustrate his successor, as he used the act to appoint 16 new circuit judges and 42 new justices of the peace. The appointees were approved by the Senate, but they would not be valid until their commissions were delivered by the Secretary of State. William Marbury had been appointed Justice of the Peace in the District of Columbia, but his commission was not delivered. Marbury petitioned the Supreme Court to compel the new Secretary of State, James Madison, to deliver the documents. Marbury, joined by three other similarly situated appointees, petitioned for a writ of mandamus compelling the delivery of commissions. So basically, the facts and questions surrounding the case was: did the administration have the right, according to the
So
Constitution?
I can do this part. I can break this down pretty well. Because the court case of Marbury Madison started as its original judicial review with the Supreme Court, and that would become the primary issue. But there were three things that they were observing. The first was, did Marbury, a prominent businessman and I believe lawyer from, was it Pennsylvania? Was it Massachusetts?
No, I forget.
I can't remember where he was from. But there were three things, and this was predicated by, like you said, the Judicial Act in 1800, and then there was the 1798 where they made it. The Supreme Court had officially six justices now. So we have this court. This court hasn't done anything. All of a sudden, we have this case involving the president telling his Secretary of State, "Hey, that guy does not deserve this justice appointment." So you have, does the court have the right to say he has that position? Can the court compel a member of the executive to follow the law? And does this violate Article 13 of the Judicial Act, or is it unconstitutional under Article 3 of the Constitution?
And so the unconstitutionality, it says Marbury to bring his claim, it was enabled by the Judiciary Act of 17, I think you said 98, but the Judiciary Act of 1789, that the Supreme Court was itself unconstitutional, since it purported to extend the court's original jurisdiction beyond Article 3.
Yeah, you're right. I have the dates mixed up. So I'm thinking of the Alien and Sedition Act, which
Mm-hmm.
caused the beef between Adams and Jefferson.
So it's this idea that
Yeah, go ahead.
they had been operating under a status quo of the courts, and before going further, it was not the first priority to check the power of the courts with the original intention of the establishment of said court.
Well, I think the issue was nobody knew what the intended power of the court was, right? So from the formation of the Constitution up until the Judiciary Act passes, you have a 10-year period where they're not really sure what the judicial is. The Judicial Act gets passed, and now Congress has the power to dictate how many people sit on the Supreme Court and how many justices there are, or how many justices there are on the Supreme Court, how many judges there are in the appellate court, and how many federal judges will be appointed to circuit.
Which
Right. So now
is
we have this breakdown of what the judicial is, but we're still having to operate with a separation of powers, right? So the foundation of this country, you have the preamble and you have the amendments. The Constitution is supreme law, which we'll get into that. This case confirming that or affirming that.
Right.
But the reason that this case is so important is it was, do we as the judicial have the power to tell someone that is a member of the executive to follow the law, to compel them to follow the law?
And what's the basis for that? What's the common document that we all know about that started everything off?
And this is where I would actually like to quote John Adams when he wrote the Massachusetts Constitution, and he said that, and this is from 1779. John Adams said, "The government of the United States has been emphatically termed a government of laws and not of man." So with that statement, like, yeah, this is a country of laws.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the supreme level of that law? Is it the common law that was established during colonial? Is it the Federalist Papers that John Adams assisted in writing, which
influenced the
Hamilton?
Yeah.
Hamilton wrote what, 200 of them, of the Federalist Papers, and then you get into the Constitution, and then you get into the first session of Congress creating federal law for man, which federal law at that point oversees state laws, right? And we're still not sure, can the federal law overrule the state? And we don't get an answer on that until June 9, 1868, when the 14th Amendment passes.
Yeah, so it's...
We go through 100 years of asking these questions.
And people forget how truly new our nation is. Like, China's been around for thousands of years. All the old world is the old world because it was established. They're not making any more new land. Those countries are more or less established with their borders, and it's like, we had an opportunity to do something unprecedented, and the genius that went into it, and as you see, it wasn't just a one-time thing. It's the evolution of the American political sphere, that what it truly means to adhere to our founding principles, and as we continue to apply them, and it's like the original goal was, hey, we just got through tyranny. We had to fight to get out of it. How do we make sure we don't fall into those traps again? And it's like, well, what do you do?
How do we make sure we don't fall into this trap again? And how do we set up so that our children and our children's children and our children's children's children don't fall into this same trap? How can we make a long-standing experiment in a constitutional republic or a constitutional democracy? However you want to refer to it, it is a democratic republic, right?
Right, it's not...
We can agree on that.
Yeah, we're not a
This is
democracy.
Not a democracy. I can't remember which one of the founding fathers said it, but he said that a democracy will be the downfall of Western civilization.
True democracy is mob rule. It's ruled by the 51% over the 49%, and it's we exhibit and borrow ideals of democracy, the theme, but as far as a capital D democracy government style, it's actually horrible. Not horrible, but it's like, for our nation, it's not going to work. We have so many different ways of life. Right.
We have democracy in local elections.
It's just not the nation is not a democracy. It's we source it from
federal elections. You have to source around, right?
Right.
This is why we appoint representatives. This is why we have the electoral college. You can say that the electoral college is unfair. That's fine. You can have that opinion. It's a necessary thing in our society, in my opinion at least, whatever that's worth, right? But when you look at local elections and you look at state elections, it is majority takes.
Right. Because that's on a smaller scale, an accurate representation of your
scale where you can actually use democracy.
Right.
But
for
that's
300,
assuming that people actually get out and vote.
Which voter turnout, right. Register early. We got 14 days, but
if you're not registered by now,
it's too late.
I don't know what you did. And if you're not decided on who you're voting by now,
well,
maybe just don't.
Well, and I have empathy for the people who aren't decided, because it's a symptom of the two-party system that we've got, that the the people with the hands on the levers of power and the people who decide what candidates get funding from the PACs, and it's like
Mm-hmm. I can't
there's
remember who said it. I was watching a YouTube video today, and this guy said it's very interesting that in this year's election cycle, it is which coup do you support?
exactly. It's like both. It's such a dichotomy. It's an exact mirror opposite the two situations, where if you're an outsider looking in, I read
Yeah.
opinions of European non-Americans all the time, and they go, "What is going on in your country?" And it's just like, how do you think we feel? Like if you're
And
anywhere
what's
near the
interesting
middle,
is,
neither
I mean,
side appeals. Neither side is appealing to the middle. Both sides are going, they're wrong. Our side is the righteous cause. We have God or whatever, moral majority on our side, and they're the enemy. Anyone who agrees with them, we don't know how you can sleep at night. And it's like, in the 60s, they used to debate, hey, my opponent agrees. That's why I really actually liked the VP debate, because they were more
phenomenal.
together, and they were like, hey, I actually agree with what Wall said or Vance said, but I disagree on how we should fight for that ideal or value or moral.
It
It's like,
reminded me of watching back the Obama McCain debate in 2008,
yeah, which
where
was
they're very respectful to each other. And then
surprisingly recent.
I don't know if you saw Obama talking, former President Obama talking at Vice President Harris's rally. I believe it was yesterday or the day before,
I don't think I caught it.
where he brought up late John McCain, rest his soul, beautiful person. And when he brought up McCain, he was specifically referencing a town hall where a woman said that she couldn't vote for Barack Obama because he's a Muslim and he's a terrorist. And John McCain just took the microphone from her and went, "No, no, I know Mr. Obama. We have served together in the Senate. He is a very respectable man. He has a very beautiful family. We just don't agree on politics."
Right.
And we're drifting so far away from that everything's just becoming a gabfest show.
Everything's a character attack. Everything's ad hominem. Everything is like baby out with the bathwater. Well, if you think
What's
this,
getting
then
the
you
most
must.
clicks?
Yeah, it's well. That's the other problem is there's a financial incentive to sensationalizing a story. So,
Mm-hmm.
cat gets saved from a tree by the fire department. It's not going to get clicks. Uh, you know, I could get colorful with the language that the media chooses to, but they amplify the most negative things because that's what will attract the most eyeballs, and that's a bad paradigm to be involved in because it takes the priority off of what's most truthful and accurate and informative to what's going to get you to outrage. Let me share this to my friends. It's
And
like,
you can look back and you watch where the shift happens in media.
mm-hmm.
It's the O.J. Simpson slow speed police chase. There
Good
was
point.
nothing happening, right? There's 30 cars behind him. There's helicopters following him, right? His entire chase was televised on every channel that would take it.
Right.
And they realized, oh, sensation gets views. And then you see 24-hour news cycles. It used to be primetime news. Everybody in the country would tune into primetime news on these legacy media
You
stations.
tune in, you find out what's happening, you go back to dinner with the kids. It's not, oh, let's see what's happening at the news. It's like at any point.
Now, check me if you want to, right? But 64% of Americans do not trust legacy media companies. And 24% of Americans don't trust social media to get their news from.
I wouldn't be surprised if the legacy distrust was higher, because even, and this is where I will give credit where credit is due. After
They're getting better.
they're getting better because it's you would expect them to, right? Because if you're a company beholden to shareholders and you have a bottom line to worry about, and there's the advent of the internet where people can publish whatever they want at any time about you, as long as it's not defamatory. If it's the truth is getting out, and then you have Project Mockingbird, where it's every single news corporation mimicking the exact same, speechwriter. Whoever's getting paid to write their speeches is underpaid for sure. But it makes you realize the curtain is almost all the way lifted, where even CNN has to uh, not backtrack on things they've said, but you saw their tone shift around the election, around the time Biden dropped out, because that was the same time like Joe Scarborough was saying, Biden's far beyond cogent, and then the debate happened and the story kind of flipped because it's like, oh, okay, we can't hide it anymore.
Yeah, and then unfortunately you have Vice President Harris on Fox News with Brett. What's his
Oh,
last name?
Brett Baer.
Brett Baer, and he asked the question: at what point, something along the lines of, at what point did you notice that President Biden was suffering from cognitive decline?
Right.
And that's an impossible question for her to answer.
Yeah, it's
right?
a
There's an answer.
It's a lose lose.
But there's no way for her to answer that without taking a loss, right? From her side, as well as giving the right ammunition to target her. They're already using things that she says in ads. It'll be her saying a one-liner that's taken out of context, and then I'm Donald J. Trump and I approve this message.
Right.
Right. But that's also happening on the other side.
Both sides, yeah.
Both sides do this. This is a normal campaign strategy. It even happened in Obama Romney.
But it's such a damaging practice, and
it's one of the most effective ways to campaign.
Which sucks. And I think
but it's true.
I think there's got to be some sort of paradigm shift where either it takes a unanimous vote by Congress, like I was saying, the only way to get, like Vivek Ramaswamy was saying, the only way to get money out of politics and for Congress to have term limits is if it gets put up to a vote and it takes effect after the people voting on it leave office. Because they're never going to vote to limit their own power. They're never going to vote to limit their own pockets. So if it's like, hey...
I hear that, and I raise you Ted Cruz.
What about him?
Oh, when he tried to bring forward a bill to limit terms.
Well,
and Mitch McConnell blocked it from going to the floor.
Right, it's because you're not going to get...
You're always going to get the onesies and twosies, right? But I want to give credit where credit is due.
But here's my position. Props for him for proposing it. However, knowing that no one's going to vote on it is a waste of time. So don't propose it unless you've got the words in there that will get people to agree on it, and then, get shit done.
But then what else are you tying into the bill, right? And this is where I'd actually like to go back to the original topic and talk a little bit about what prompted the argument between Adams and Jefferson, right? Because Adams is a Federalist, or was a Federalist, very in favor of big government. And then you have Democratic Republican Jefferson, right? Well, the Federalists were very in favor of passing the Alien and Sedition Act. And that was a four-part event, right? So you have three amazing things, but then you had to tie on one little shiny turd on the back end of it to get it to pass, right? And it passed narrowly. It was 44 to 41 in its congressional vote. But your first act of it is the Alien Friends Act. So that makes it easier for people from friendly nations to immigrate in. And then your second part of it is Alien Enemies Act. So if you're an enemy of the United States, it's going to be a lot harder for you to immigrate in. We're not saying you can't. We're just saying it's going to be harder for you to come in, right? There's going to be a lot more checks that occur. Then you have the Naturalization Act, which is by far the greatest piece of this, which is if you are born in the United States, you are an American citizen. Absolutely through and through, no argument, you're an American citizen. But then you have the Sedition Act, right? And the Sedition Act is a disgusting overstep of the government. Because what it did was it made it so that if you used your speech to elicit anti-federal government propaganda, right, whatever that means, that they could fine you and throw you in prison for up to 3 years for having a disagreement with the Federalist Party, essentially, because they were in full control at the time.
I find it interesting the the language used, quote, made it a crime to publish, quote, false, scandalous, and malicious writing.
Because
So, what is
malicious
malicious?
is not an
Fa-
objective thing.
right, that's
It's
like
completely subjective.
you
What's
meant
malicious to you is not malicious to me.
you had ill will by publishing my my dirty laundry. Like, okay, but if it's true and you were involved in something you shouldn't have been, it's not malicious. Sure, it was negative towards you.
Let's compare it to something current, right? So something malicious could be Donald Trump is not an incumbent, right? So the incumbent is Harris.
Right.
So even though she's the VP, she's the incumbent. She's on the incumbent ticket.
Right.
So when he says that her rallies are empty and there's nobody there and she doesn't have as many supporters as she says she does,
Lock them up.
that's malicious. So are you going to weaponize the Department of Justice? Are you going to weaponize the judiciary and then put this person in prison for 3 years?
That's the thing.
This act was implemented.
Right.
The Sedition Act. They charged 9 people. 9 people that were prominent figures in the anti-federalist movement. And that's deplorable.
It sets a precedent. And
I mean, luckily, it was very quickly taken away.
Right.
We very quickly made changes to that, right? And Marbury Madison wasn't the reason that did it, but Marbury Madison is what laid the framework for it because it gave us judicial review.
Right.
It made it so that appellate court and Supreme Court can challenge, at the time, federal law.
So this basically provides the tools to check. This provides the runaway truck ramp for a government gone tyrannical. Because if you get to a point where the government establishes roadblocks towards checking it, quis ipsos custodiet, Latin, that means who watches the watchmen.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you got foxes guarding the hen house, yeah, everything's good, picking a feather out of their teeth. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
let's take a couple. Let's go back to square one and say, here's where we're supposed to be. Here's where we're at. How can we bridge the gap? Because if you get too far away, you start to people forget history, but also you lose the ability to accurately teach it because the original sources are archived and what becomes accepted reality changes with culture. And
right, and I mean, I'm pulling information from the Congressional Library, Cornell Law's Library, Harvard's Library, but these are things that were written down 200 plus years ago. My interpretation, I guarantee, is not the same as the 6 justices who sat on the court at the time.
right, but tying it,
Really weird to have an even number.
yeah, it's kind of like that's why it's good that we have the framework we do, where if it's in line with the Constitution,
Yeah.
we have judicial review to verify that and go
Mm-hmm.
black and white, apples and oranges, or apples and apples, and determine.
Yeah, and the 3 big things that this case did was 1, give us judicial review. 2, establish that the Constitution is above the law of man.
Mm-hmm.
And 3, which wouldn't happen for about 100 years, is that
States
the
are,
Supreme Court can challenge state laws.
yes,
Which I would make an argument that Marbury Madison laid the framework for at least one of the Reconstruction amendments, being the 14th Amendment.
right, because at some point you would just have 50 different nations. If the state law was paramount, full stop, then you just move to wherever aligns best with you, regardless of whether it's in line with the Constitution. But the check to that balance of the state being paramount to the federal is the Supreme Court saying, yeah, but you can add to, but you can't remove
Add
from.
to, but can't take away.
Right.
Take away.
We have
Exactly.
a minimum law. You can regulate within these parameters, but you can't make murder legal. You can't there's
We'll just I'll name off a few examples real quick of what. So the 14th Amendment is what guarantees that every citizen has equal rights, right? It's the one that says race, creed, religion, gender. It doesn't matter. Right?
right.
Everybody that's an American has the same rights as an American.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 15th would go on to make it where states could not prevent formerly enslaved individuals from becoming citizens, and the 13th is what banned slavery.
Right.
The fact that there's one in between that is weird. I don't understand.
Well,
I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I don't understand why the 13th and the 15th are two separate things. To me, it has to be that they knew they couldn't pass it at that time, and they needed a certain amount of states to ratify it, and they were trying to bring back the Confederacy, which was a failed revolution, right? It lasted, what, 3 years?
right. It could also be that we live our Constitution has amendments because things have happened that were
It's a
unprecedented.
living document.
Right, and we've needed to adjust our sites.
Right, and
Playing,
the 14th Amendment is the most litigated piece of paper.
but playing devil's advocate for the North. Imagine if you were so naive to your values at the time. If you're anti-slavery and you're in the North, and you pass the 13th, you vote on the 13th, and you go, every man should be free. It's every man is created equal. You wouldn't think, hey, they're just going to make it so if you were it was unprecedented at the time that a state would make laws around slaves voting or slaves becoming citizens, because up until then it was just
Unprecedented to think that a slave was a human.
right. So
slavery had been going on since the inception of man.
So to make
that we outlawed it, like we weren't the first country.
No,
we were not. I'll fully acknowledge that.
No,
but it was such a new thing of like, hey, you probably shouldn't own another human.
Right. So it was unprecedented for a prior slave to become human in the eyes of the law. So it was therefore unprecedented to have to make a law regarding the power of the state to restrict that transition from slave to human, and then what rights that human has. And it's like, oh, well, you were a prior slave, so you don't. It's like
even we'll before the 13th Amendment, we'll compromise. We'll give you seats on the Congress on a 3/5 space.
Yeah, you're almost a full person. Yeah, it's
you're almost there.
Right.
Right. And it's just looking at it from a modern perspective. You're like, that
is bonkers.
How?
Right. But it's because
how did we as a nation do that? Because you see what we do now. Right? We're not perfect. There's nothing perfect about our country. Do I think that American exceptionalism is completely okay? Absolutely. I don't think that you should have to apologize for being an American. I don't think you should have to apologize for being an American.
No,
I don't think you should apologize for thinking America is the greatest country on the planet. Because I genuinely do, and I think that I am blessed to have been born here and to live here, and I was proud to have served for this country. Right?
Blessed, truly.
That is something.
Because I had no say in it.
Near and dear to my heart.
I don't hold where people were born against them, and I would appreciate if I was like I had no choice being born here, but I recognize the
benefit of me being born here.
The benefit and the weight that our nation has on the global scale, and what has changed in the last 200 years is more drastic and further different than the previous 500. I mean, it was more or less the same. You had slavery, slave trade, and stuff was bad, and then it was like, hey,
the Industrial Revolution happens.
It's like, hey, you can go somewhere where there's running water and lighting. What's that?
No, I understand why even today, why people want to come here.
No, absolutely, and I think that's why I honestly think that legal immigration should be bolstered. I think if we can, we should take in as many as feasibly possible. The problem with the current system is how long it takes, right? If you apply, people wait.
How expensive it is.
Right. And that creates.
I have a friend who is an Italian citizen. They've been attempting to get American citizenship. They're married to an American. They've been trying to
Yep.
They do not have enough money in their bank account. And even though they are married to an American, they cannot get to the United States because they will not be granted a visa. Because the government's like, you're going to overstay your visa. And it's like, hey, they have a kid together who's an American citizen.
Right. You're letting
So,
the welfare of an American citizen go to neglect to uphold an immigration law that, like, you also have to. What was the?
it's a broken system. It needs complete revision.
Absolutely. And
And I'd be a fool to say that a lot of the illegal migrants who come across the southern border and work the farms during harvesting seasons aren't necessary for our ecosystem that is the United States.
I would argue that's because we've gotten used to it.
Well, absolutely.
If
We already complain about grocery prices being what they are right now, though.
right, but if there was never like we just like our constitution, it's subject to unprecedented things happening,
Right.
and on the other side of the illegal labor sword, you have the corporations that are breaking the law. It's like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
you guys are doing this to benefit the consumer, and yeah, I get that, but if no one had ever started accepting illegal labor, then those jobs would have been filled, and those corporations would have had to pay a higher wage and have an American accept the job and offer benefits, and it all would have been above board, and sure, stuff would have been inflated, but it would have offset over time.
Right.
But as soon as, because it's a free market, if your competition's using illegal labor, well, what am I going to do? Hire an American? No.
Yeah.
I'll go out of business.
There's that saying in business: adapt or die.
Yeah, so I think.
But I mean, that's how it is. What I would like to talk about is some good things
Yeah.
the government's done, right? So with the 14th Amendment, you get Brown versus Board of Education, desegregate schools. That's a win.
Pretty
right?
pretty big dub.
That's a good thing. I don't think they should have been segregated in the first place, but also I was born in present time.
Right.
Right. I understand that there were biases. Right. It's hard for me to see from my perspective. Right. You get Loving versus Virginia, interracial marriage. That's cool. Right. If we're gonna be treated as equals, you better damn well let everybody get married.
Right.
Which is why I'd also like to talk about. I don't want to mess his name up. Oberg. I'm sorry. I'm gonna mispronounce this. I'm sorry.
Spell it.
Obergefell versus Hodges, 2015. Same-sex marriage.
Auberge.
Yeah, I don't want to butcher their name.
It's all
this decision was.
Aubergefell or Aubergefell.
Obergefell.
Okay.
But same-sex marriage. And then mess-ups from the 14th Amendment can also be included, where it's specifically Bush versus Gore.
Refresh my memory.
Where the Supreme Court decided who won the presidential election based off of one county in Florida.
The recount. What did it come down to?
They ordered a stop to the recount.
Interesting.
Because of how long it was taking, and they wanted a peaceful transfer of power.
Delayed isn't unpeaceful. Yeah, that's kind of a whoopsie-daisy. Like, however long it takes. However.
But here's the problem, right? There's no precedent for the president not assuming on that date. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that they can do that. There's nothing in constitutional law that says that they can do that. There is something in the law that is precedent that says that the Supreme Court can tiebreak.
Right. So it comes up to the justices at the time.
Who are the justices at the time?
Right.
Yeah. And that's... You know what happened? I do think that George W. Bush genuinely loved and loves this country.
Mm.
I don't think that he ran for president for necessarily the right reasons. I think he ran to appease his father, which is fine. You know, I mean, you're a man, I'm a man. The number one goal in my life, I don't know about you, but was to make my father proud, right?
If my dad was CIA director then president,
Yeah.
I'd probably want to do something on that level.
Like you grow up with this person that you're looking at, and you're like, all right, I got to do that,
Or
and I got
something
to
better.
try to do better.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that your dad was the CIA director and the president of the United States. Like, imagine being Jeb Bush.
Oh, dude. Low energy Jeb.
Low energy Jeb.
That's it. That's career just hanging up. Go get into the stock market or something with what you know. That's the best hope you got.
Well,
That's
he's
it.
in politics, right?
That's
He's
it.
just not the president.
That's at least, yeah, but at that point you shoot for the stars, and
No,
that's,
you aim for the moon, and if you miss the moon, at least you're in the stars.
or a street lamp. It's like
Yeah, I mean, some of those flies get confused, huh?
big old moths. But I think we made a good chunk, made a good dent. The Going forward, knowing what we know about our constitution, our government style, the uh, phenomena that prevail across spans of time. I'm sounding like Kamala Harris, but we are a victim of the context in which we live. Victim sounds bad, but in other words, we have no choice when we were born or what sort of moral compass we were born into. You know, it's like if you're the lowest of the low poverty in the world in some slum in some third world country with no electricity, no whatever, it's like, would you steal from your neighbor to eat? Probably. Would I? I'm not that hungry. It's like, I have different. It's a subjective reality. But realizing that, and that we can take a step back and look back, we can know the minds of the people who were making these decisions in history and why they made them. And if they're like Marbury versus Madison, we can decide and say
And
yes.
just to conceptualize why we're even talking about something that was from 1801, right? This decision still has effects today, right? This decision laid the groundwork that the judicial operates on.
Yep.
This individual decision is the reason that a topic which I don't think you and I should get into because we're each penis carrying men
Sure.
is Roe versus Wade.
Right.
Marbury Madison is the reason that the Supreme Court was able to overturn Roe v. Wade. So a decision from 1801 affected a law being overturned, a long-standing law, long-standing precedent was overturned in 2022.
Yeah, the timeline's crazy. How long from Marbury v. Madison to what? 73?
221 years.
It's crazy. And it's to show
A court case, not even a law, a court case from 221 years prior allowed for that to be overturned.
yeah. And as a penis having man,
Judicial review.
I think the overturning of that law allows for a more diverse representation of the will of the people. Now, there's the argument to be had of whether the subject being protected or overturned is a basic right or not. That's for the states to decide now, and you can vote.
But this is where the 14th Amendment complaint comes in, right? Which the 14th Amendment is what Roe v. Wade was tried on. And so it's is abortion a right? Which is a conversation that I'm not comfortable having because I'm not informed enough.
Right.
I can carry my own personal opinions.
Right.
But it's not a conversation that I feel that I should be having.
Yeah, and I don't even if it's yet to be determined, right? Because our document is living, and I don't think they had medical procedures for abortion back then. Again, I don't know, but
Yeah,
this is another unprecedented time where it's like, hey,
we
this is
absolutely have inalienable rights.
right.
You know, you have the right to free speech, free press, free religion. You have the right to keep and bear arms.
Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right?
You don't have the right to happiness, but you may pursue
Well,
it.
you don't have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness if you have violated the law.
That's right. We disenfranchised lawbreakers pretty unanimously. Yeah.
Which is a conversation I'm sure
That's episode.
we'll
If
get into.
if episode 1 was the basis by which we judge constitutionality of all laws, episode 2 has got to be the prison industrial complex, because I mean now we're looking at
That or the military industrial.
what laws get applied where to whom, and yeah, who gets to reap the free labor.
Is there equal enforcement of the laws across race, religion, creed?
I don't think so.
I maybe.
That it'd be hard. It's hard to verify. I tend to be more cynical and less believing in humans. Man is fallible. I think in the Bible it says not one man is good. We're all subject to greed and selfish desires, and to entrust someone who is just like you and me to a position of power to make decisions that affect everyone is a very tall task, and it's why we have the Constitution to limit that.
You know what I just realized?
What you just realized.
We didn't talk about what the Supreme Court's decision on Marbury Madison was.
There we go, assuming everyone knows everything we do. 40 minutes in. So here's the point, guys.
Yeah. So here's the point of the whole thing, right?
In conclusion.
So I wrote this down so that I could read it and not misspeak.
Okay.
And this is coming from the Cornell Law. It's not word for word quoted. I took it and wrote it down in a way that I could understand it.
Okay.
So, the Supreme Court decided that Marbury did have the right to that position because all due process was followed. He was selected, and he was selected by the president. He was confirmed by the Congress.
Yep.
They determined that the delivery of his appointment, the delivery of his commission, was a formality, that he had already been confirmed and commissioned, right? So the process was followed, and that the court could compel, so this is part 2, the court could compel a member of the executive to follow the law with a writ of mandamus. This meant that Article 13 of the Judicial Act was unconstitutional, because Article 3 of the Constitution states that the Supreme Court can only have original jurisdiction when a state, not an individual, a state is party to a lawsuit. So the Judicial Act allowed the Supreme Court to have original jurisdiction when a single party was plaintiff or defendant in the suit. But that's not what the Constitution says. And this is where the problem was. Because the Supreme Court absolutely, adamantly agreed that Marbury should have been able to take that appointment. But because the law that made that so was deemed unconstitutional, they ruled in favor of the Constitution. So, it affirmed that the Constitution was the supreme law of the land, and that the Supreme Court must solely uphold the Constitution. And this is interesting because it is one of very few cases that we have seen tried at the Supreme Court. In general, actually tried at the Supreme Court.
Right.
Because they're usually
appellate level.
Right?
Yeah.
It's usually appellate. But we saw the court intentionally look to uphold the Constitution instead of intentionally look to see if this person was wrong.
Based off of recent legal precedent rather than
what is the responsibility. Yeah. And keep in mind, the Supreme Court is what, 4 years old at this point?
Right.
right? They haven't done anything. They've done bits and pieces, but nothing notable.
First hit's a home run. Holy shit.
First hit's a home run. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? The rookie, first time stepping up, takes a fastball down the center and sends it to right field, straight over the fence, 400 feet.
Who wrote the decision? Was it a?
I think it was a Federalist. I can't remember.
Is it a?
I can get it for you.
Because that's, I mean, it's like, should we consider the founding document? Yeah. But I'm glad that we talked about this, because this is stuff that you don't even read about, or if you do, it's half a paragraph in a history textbook, and the history teacher goes...
Yeah, and obviously we ventured off topic.
Right.
Like, which is...
Blame that on the first episode. There's too much to talk about.
Chief Justice John Marshall delivered the decision.
Johnny...
Who, it's arguable that John Marshall shouldn't have even been the Chief Justice, but that's not part of this question.
Right.
Because Adams had appointed it. Adams' Secretary of State was fulfilling the Secretary of State position and had already been confirmed as the Chief Justice, but then did not fulfill that role.
It's kind of like... who was it? When it was debating, the people were debating on who the VP picks were going to be, and the question was between J.D. Vance and someone else, not...
it wasn't DeSantis.
Not DeSantis. But I think that the choice for Vance was because Ohio's governor's red.
He's from Ohio.
Right, so they get to pick...
That's the reason.
So they'll pick the...
It's the same reason that Harris chose the Minnesota governor. They're swing states.
It's because they know... Well, it's a swing state, but it's because the governor picks the Senate replacement.
Yeah.
So if Trump had taken DeSantis, he would have deprived Florida of 2 years of governorship, and they would have had to elect someone else, and you don't know who you're going to get, so they don't want... So in the same way...
Which is why Waltz is an interesting pick. Because he was picked because it's a battleground state, and admittedly, he's a great politician. And he's done some really good things.
He knows how to politic.
Specifically, I can reference him making school lunches free.
Yeah, that seems like a sort of a
no-brainer.
Yeah, it's like, hey, if you can't afford lunch for your kid,
If
sorry.
my kid has to go to school, you're gonna feed them, right?
Right.
Like, taxes are paying for this school. I think teachers should get paid more.
I think so too.
I think there's a great misuse of funding in the education system. I think there's a great misuse of funding in pretty much all levels of bureaucracy. But
these are all great topics for future episodes. Moral of the story is there's bloat, and there's a lot of stuff that's quasi-constitutional that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of things that are on the border, right? There's a lot of things that the Supreme Court could make a decision on, but they're not going to accept to see it.
Well, it's all optics.
Yeah, and currently, right? You have the Supreme Court, which is supposed to be nonpartisan.
Ideally.
We have 5 justices currently who are incredibly conservative. We have one who's fairly moderate right-leaning, and we have it's 4 that are incredibly conservative, 1 that is right-leaning, and then 4 that are liberal, right?
Yeah, because it's usually...
Is that the breakdown?
It's usually 5-4, but one of the 5 are,
fairly moderate.
Yeah, could go either way.
The court isn't supposed to be political, but here we are in 24, a week out from election. And
Also,
one of the biggest concerns is that the court is no longer unbiased.
It's interesting, their work schedule. You know how often the Supreme Court is in session? Because I don't.
In session?
Yeah.
In session, not very often. How often they are working is different than how often they're in session. Because it's the same way that you look at like circuit judges. So they only can count it as in session when they're actively convened.
Mm.
So there's a lot that's going on in the background.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure it's a very much bigger picture than what is public.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, do you want to start to close this one out?
Yeah, I think this was a good first episode. As you can kind of tell, there's a lot of topics that we are eager to discuss surrounding the American politisphere, and we just hope you're there to be a part of the conversation. We're not perfect; we don't have the answers, but talking about what's going on and trying to get to a closer degree of the truth than what is propagated by the legacy media, I think talking more is better. Talking less is less information. And what
And I,
it good.
I'd like to say that these are conversations that Jarrod and I have frequently, and
Offline.
the reason offline, right? And the reason that we're doing this is because we're two friends that have similar opinions. There's definitely things that we disagree on, but we're friends, and we have these conversations. And these conversations are real. They're authentic. We believe that they are the truth. We fact check each other pretty regularly. If you saw our text feeds with each other, it's a lot of disagreement, and then a lot of hey.
Here's what is real.
This is what I'm actually able to find that this was.
Right.
And I think these are really healthy conversations that you should be having with your friends wherever you are, even if you're not in the United States, right? Like I understand that even if you're not in the United States, like you're probably still absorbing American media, you're probably still absorbing American ideologies.
Whether you want to or not.
And even if you're not in America, I think one of the most important things that you can do is actually formulate an opinion on a topic. Actually research that so you have an understanding and you can defend your stance. And we are about 1 week out from an election which will potentially change the course of the republic, right? So you need to understand that if you are 18, you are an adult. And if you're registered to vote, go do it. Because the amount of voter turnout is wild. The fact that you have the right to vote and people fought for this for so long.
And most people don't vote.
And most people don't vote. Your voice matters, your opinion matters, but your voice only matters if you get out there and you vote. Left or right, I don't care.
Red state,
go out and have their voice heard.
red state, blue state, doesn't matter. I live in California, and I may not vote the same way down the line as my neighbor, but not voting is not going to get anything done. And
even if you think that your vote doesn't matter, right? We saw during the COVID pandemic that local elections matter.
a lot of the swing states.
North Carolina is a swing state.
Yep.
Right? So if I didn't vote, I would have no right to complain about anything that's going on.
That's right. If you don't vote, you can't complain.
Yeah, and if you don't vote, don't come at me complaining, right? If you're under 18, you can come at me and complain. That's fine.
Yeah.
Because you can't vote, right? But if you're of voting age and you don't get out there and vote, and then you sit there and you complain about politics, I don't care about your opinion.
However, your opinion should be voiced on the pathway that it was designed for, which is the
right that you have,
the system that we have set up. Realize that it is.
Let me change actually what I just said, because there's an individual that I would like to reference, and I do not know his real name, but he goes by the name Jelly.
Okay.
And he is.
He can't vote.
He is a felon.
Yep.
He cannot vote. But if you're still here 55 minutes into this, when we end this out, I want you to go look at when Jelly Roll sat in front of the Senate and talked about the fentanyl epidemic.
That's right.
And you tell me that that is not an opinion that matters. So actually, you know what? I'll completely retract my statement. Opinion always matters.
Our first retraction.
Yeah, completely retract my statement. Your opinion always matters. But I do encourage you that if you have the ability to vote, go vote.
Yep.
Even if you think your vote doesn't matter, yes, it does.
Yeah, ultimately, it's the will of the people that should be upheld, and I think it's no coincidence that I wouldn't say most, a increasing population of Americans are feeling like no one's views are being upheld. A lot of people think that, you know, one way or the other, it's not going to matter this election, and we shouldn't be at that point because if more
Well, I don't
people
think the
voted,
world's gonna end.
no, and that's the thing. Here's the thing to remember, right? Life goes on, right? Unless a meteor hits us or a solar flare, which we don't have control over that, so that's nothing to worry about. Really, it's either our problem or suddenly it's not. Um, but the sun will rise on November 6th. Like it's not gonna go so drastically overnight that you won't have the same standard of living. Sure, things are more expensive. Sure, who knows? Maybe your whatever your interpretation of the election results are. I bet you stuff's not going to change that much if you really think about it. Because
And even again, I'll bring it back to Maybury Madison, right? This this gives the Supreme Court the power to overrule executive action.
so even if someone does something so can't believe they did that, it's like okay, well, if they didn't have the power to do that, then it will be checked, and if it's not,
Yeah,
then I guess we don't have a country anymore, right? But it's
yeah. It's like
mostly
Kamala Harris.
usually
It's like Kamala Harris saying that she's going to give Congress 100 days to ban assault weapons, whatever an assault weapon is, that whatever.
right,
And if they don't, she'll use executive action. And it's like, yeah, I mean, sure, right? But the Supreme Court's going to throw that out.
right. It's like you may pen that, and that may be your signature, but we don't answer to you. We answer to a living document that's
Constitution.
right here, buddy. Read it. Oh, you
At
don't
the
know
end of the day,
cursive.
the president is just a man or woman,
Yep.
and that's a really important thing to remember. A judge is just a man in a coat or woman.
We live by
The president is
laws.
just a man or a woman.
We live by laws, not man.
Yep. And I mean, you want to just close it out with the John Adams quote again, and then sign off.
Go for it.
The government of the United States has been emphatically termed a government of laws and not of man.
And with that, Cody and Jarrod Talks episode 1 is concluded. Thank you all for tuning in, and stay tuned for more.